I'm Aryeh Schwartz, and welcome to the Winsidr Show, where it's all about the W. The playoffs are here, and it's time to dissect the first round matchups. I'm joined this episode with Myles Ehrlich, Winsidr Liberty beat writer. It's time to break down the Chicago Sky versus the New York Liberty. If you like our show, please consider joining our Patreon community, patreon.com/Winsidr. For less than a cup of coffee, you can directly show support for the hard work we do covering the W. And don't forget to see our amazing staff's written content over at winsidr.com. That's winsidr.com. If you're looking to get tickets for the WNBA playoffs, thanks to our sponsor TickPick, you don't have to worry. The original no-fee ticketing site and official ticketing partner of the defending WNBA champion, Chicago Sky. Use the link tickpick.com/Winsidr for all your upcoming ticket purchases for the WNBA, NFL, NBA, or any other event. Speaking of our amazing staff that produces the amazing written content and sometimes the amazing TikTok content, Myles, New York Liberty, Chicago Sky, the defending champions versus a Steph Dolson revenge team. I don't know. What's going on, man?
What's going on? Great to talk to you, Aryeh. Yeah, it's a very, very exciting series. Steph Dolson has been somewhat in this position before. The Sky were the sixth seed last year, going into the postseason, and then made a run. But it's a very, very different team than the one she's on right now, and she's going up against now the defending champions, her former teammates in Chicago.
It has the makings for E60 or 30 for 30, depending on who wins. Either way it does, right? Because this is a story of a Chicago Sky team that going into last year's playoffs, as you mentioned, before they make that epic championship run, they were a 500 team, I think it really proved the idea that any given game, it's not any given Sunday, but any given game, anybody can run away. And we always knew they had that strength. This year, they've just been on top of cloud nine, really running it. Are we going to see a repeat for the Chicago Sky, or are we going to see a different team with maybe some similarities in the regular season push through and beat the top seeded team? I'm curious for you, as we know what happened in the regular season. I'm sure you can recap that a little bit. The Sky beat the Liberty 3-1. Correct me if I'm wrong at any point, obviously.
So
What
far,
did
so
you?
good.
There we go. The simplest stats are always the hardest, right? Talk to me about what you saw in the regular season when these two teams match up. Kind of what are the weaknesses? What do you see by the style of play? What do you think the weaknesses are? Just give me an overview, and I'll kind of jump in and pick apart whatever you say.
So the first matchup between the Liberty and the Sky was one of the worst games for New York all season. It was the second game of the season. They had just come off of a shocking upset of the Connecticut Sun opening night, and then the Sky just demolished them. It was 83-50, I think, was the final score, and it wasn't even that close. It was a game where the only double figure scorer for New York was Han Shu, who had 10 points off the bench. And what was at that point, it was surprising to see Han on the floor. But the other three games were much, much closer. There was one that the Liberty probably should have won, where Sloot hit a game-winning three with a second left off a really nice pass, but some good post defense. And then there was a game that was a 2-point game until the last minute and a half, and Sloot again hit a big three to put Chicago up 5 and kind of pull that game away. That ended up being an 8-point Chicago win after some free throws. And then there was a game where the Liberty won, and the Liberty won by 3, but it was a game that they almost very, very nearly gave away. And it was against a Chicago team that had gotten there at noon for a 7 o'clock game that night because they'd played the day before and got stuck in the airport overnight. And I said that Courtney Vandersloot was instrumental in winning those other games. Sloot did not play in that game as well. So you could talk about, how much that affected things. But Betnijah Laney, who was the Liberty's lone all-star in 2021, missed all but that first terrible game, which was her season debut right before she got surgery, and missed a majority of the season. So for those matchups, you look at the one that was a blowout, but the other three have been really closely contested games. And to their credit, the Liberty, they've showed that they could beat any team. They could also lose to any team, but they did have a win against Chicago. They had a couple of wins against Connecticut. They were able to beat Vegas once. They beat the Mystics twice. So they have shown the ability on any given day to be able to hang with some of the tougher teams in the league.
I would say that they're almost like I've said this all season long. The Liberty are an interesting team because it doesn't matter for the most part, and I would put my money down on this, even though we just talked about a blowout. But it doesn't matter what happens in the first three quarters. Around the 5 minute mark in 95% of the Liberty games that I've watched, something's going to happen. Either the Liberty have a large lead and they're going to blow it and it becomes a game, or the other team has a large lead and the Liberty make a crazy run and all of a sudden it's a super interesting game. Now, sometimes they bring it within 10 and that lead does not disappear. Sometimes it goes down to a last minute or last second play. But on the flip side, the Chicago Sky are a similar team in the sense that they just allow teams to stick around while they've had a great season and they for a very long time were top of the totem pole. You know, the one thing was it was more about them being clutch than playing perfect games. And there's the old cliche of great teams find ways to win. Doesn't matter how, you just find a way to win. But there is something to be said of like, you don't want every game to come down to the last possession. You don't want to have to win you know 10 of your X amount of games by a lapsed defensive play or like a luck, you know what I mean? Just a lucky bounce. But on the other hand, the Liberty are that type of team that can take advantage of those situations. You have Marine who can we just take a moment here and talk about this, Myles? The form is weird. It's exciting. As somebody who spends a day job as a photographer, it makes me want to just like Photoshop her into a variety of different things because why is she so like for people who don't know what I'm talking about, the way she shoots just coming off, like in motion, the kick up leg, falling to the side, it almost looks like a wide receiver catching like a diving midair pass.
Yeah, yeah. So Andrea Carter on one of the Liberty broadcasts earlier this season made a comparison that I haven't heard topped yet, where she said Marine almost plays like she's underwater. She's just her game is so fluid and so smooth. And the comparison that I've made, which I don't think is nearly as good, but she reminds me of a quarterback, a modern day NFL quarterback who breaks the pocket and is really, really good when she's on the run and when she's moving and when she's improvising, but doesn't necessarily like she is not a typical point guard. She's not someone that you want walking up the court and having the ball. She's someone you want to get the ball on the move because then people have to keep track of her and she's always looking for what the next step is, and she's always a step or two ahead of opponents and sometimes her own teammates who aren't expecting some of the angles. But yeah, she's aspirational and she is exciting to watch. Her best shot in my mind is the catching the ball coming left and then like moving left while she shoots a three from the left wing. That seems to be the shot that she hits most consistently. Um, and she's just such an exciting player. Her layup package is a lot of fun. She loves weird angled passes. She loves one arm passes. She loves to leave her feet and throw bounce passes. She knows how to contort her body to find passing angles that are not otherwise there. And I think that this is a perfect team for her because Sabrina doesn't have that athleticism, but she does have that vision, and she also loves to make those passes in tight windows. So with Marine coming over a couple of months into the season, these players were already ready for a passer that was less conventional than what you'll normally get. And we saw that. I think a part of Sabrina's turnovers coming down is that players expect her to be looking for the leak outs now and are not running down with one arm ahead of the pack because they know that Sabrina's going to find them, and Marine is very much cut from that same cloth.
It's pretty fun to watch them play basketball. I wish Chelsea Gray was on that team. It would just be Harlem Globetrotters
No
style
one would ever
basketball.
shoot, right? It would
Right,
just
right.
be
Yeah, but you know what? Like somehow they would still score an insane amount of points. It was I saw like a TikTok of somebody doing like bounce pass buckets. And it would basically be that. They wouldn't shoot the ball, they would just like do insane behind the back passes that like bounce and go in. Um well, let's talk about it from a simplistic view, right? Offense. So, the Liberty offense or the Chicago Sky offense. Where do you think favor lies on that? I mean, obviously, Chicago Sky are one of the more prolific offenses, but their defense has stepped up too this year. Where do you think the Chicago Sky have the advantage, and where do you think the New York Liberty have the advantage?
so the Chicago Sky led the league in field goal percentage and were second in scoring. So they are a very, very just like cohesive offensive machine. They are a veteran team. They make all the right plays. They shot 48.1% from the floor. And for context, second place was nearly 2 percentage points behind them. And that was the Connecticut Sun, who are a team that mostly stay inside the paint. Uh, Meanwhile, the Liberty are all the way down at ninth at 43.1%. But where the Liberty's advantage is beyond the arc. So they led the league for the second straight year in 3-point makes. Um, and we're fourth in 3-point percentage, which is, it's not like they're just hoisting them up without actually connecting. But they made close to 10 threes a night, 9.7 threes a night. And for the most part this season, for the Liberty to stay in games, they have been one of those live by the three, die by the three teams. They, I think that was what to me was the most impressive part of their win against Atlanta. Not on the last day of the season where they did have one of their like exciting 3-point games, but the game before that in Atlanta, the Dream sold out to stop them from shooting the three. And the Liberty shot just 4 of 16 that day. 4 was tied for second lowest. 16 were tied for second fewest attempts on their season. And they still found a way to win. They found a way to win in the paint. That's going to be a lot tougher, I think, when you're looking at a Candace Parker and an Emma Meeseman and an Aryeh Stevens and just the front court depth that the Sky have. And I think that that's going to be the toughest thing for the Liberty to try to exploit is that front court mismatch.
Well, I think it comes down to I'm not going to bury the lead, but the bigs on New York.
Mm-hmm.
How are they going to play? Where is this going to happen? And maybe it's. Would you agree with me in saying that it's more important for the bigs on New York to have an emphasis on defense in this series than on offense?
I think all year they say that these bigs are defensively minded. Steph Dolson is a player that oftentimes does stuff that does not show up on the stat sheet. And that's become very true on this New York team in particular, because so much of how New York finds success is in getting Sabrina Ionescu open. And nobody is bigger for that than Steph Dolson. It's really Steph Dolson and Crystal Dangerfield. It's Crystal being out on the floor and cutting and moving and making sure that the defense has to stay honest.
Real quick. Shout out to Crystal Dangerfield
Oh,
because,
absolutely.
I mean, what a season.
Yeah.
Sorry, continue.
No. I was just going to heap more praise on her because she's someone else like Steph who doesn't necessarily always show up in the stat sheet. But she's always moving. She's always cutting. There is no defensive assignment that she won't take on. And it really helps to complement whatever New York needs, whatever Sabrina Ionescu needs in order to find open spaces. It comes because Crystal is doing a lot of the nitty gritty dirty work, and Steph is too. Steph is often the one that's setting the weak side screen. So it's not even the actions that you're going to be seeing at the top of the key a lot of the time, but Steph will be making sure that Sabrina can come around a curl and get a little bit of separation, because that's not her strength, is not her separation, right? It's her shot making, it's her vision. But she's not the quickest, she's not the most athletic player on the floor. And I think that that's something that Sandy Brondello has done really well and has game planned, is for Sabrina to be successful, for the team to be successful, Sabrina needs to be successful. And for her to be successful, she needs to be getting into spots that are more comfortable for her. And that's definitely a big transition from her first couple of years in the league and this season.
I completely agree with that, and I just want to say I went into this episode saying I'm not going to do any Steph Dolson bashing. I'm gonna let the series speak for itself. So shout out to Kicks Queen on our playbacks. Uh, Speaking of, join us for our next watch party on playback for the playoffs. We'll be doing one for the games on Wednesday night, and probably I would assume if we have enough fun and we're not too hungover, we'll be doing one for the ones on Thursday night too, and definitely some more during the season or the playoffs. I'm still adjusting to the playoffs. Getplayback.com/room/Winsidr. That's getplayback.com/room/Winsidr. We do fun giveaways with trivia questions. It's always a good time. And we bring on elite basketball minds like Myles and Rachel and Owen, and Jasmine, and a variety of others, and sometimes former players to discuss the game, see what's happening. All right, let's break it down. What needs to happen, right? Because I think going into this, most people give the Chicago Sky probably the favor, the odds for taking this series. If people haven't figured out already, I'm interviewing the bottom seeded teams, media members who cover the bottom seeded teams, because I feel like, especially in WNBA media, because it's not as limited as it used to be. We've seen a lot of people pop up, and that's amazing. But the mainstream outlets and a lot of people are going to be really easily pulled in to talk about the top dogs, the Las Vegas Aces, the Chicago Sky, Seattle and Connecticut. But I want to give a little bit of love and respect to these bottom seeded teams. So, Myles, let's start off this way. What needs to happen for New York to win? Not just one game, because if you ask me, like, based on what we talked about in the first segment, it's pretty easy to understand how New York could steal one game, right? It comes down to New York is the type of team that sticks around in games, and Chicago is the type of team that allows, to a fault, opponents to stick around in games. And when you have players like Marine, when you have players like Sabrina, and you know what? I'll even say this. I'll say a compliment for Dolson. Dolson has come up clutch in key moments, even when not having the greatest of games in her career. So I'll give respect to that. Shout out to the finals last year. What needs to happen for the Liberty to pull off two victories, not just one, in this series, and move on to the next round?
So it starts in the first quarter. It starts right off the opening tip, and that's been a struggle consistently for the Liberty this season. They rank 10th in terms of plus minus in first quarters. They're minus 2.1 per game, whereas Chicago ranked second at plus 2.8 per game. So Chicago starts really well, and the Liberty typically start very slowly, and they often find themselves in double digit holes, especially later in the season. Just a couple of hours ago, media spoke to Betnijah Laney and Steph Dolson, and Steph was asked about how to match Chicago's intensity, and she said, "This is playoff time. There have been a couple of games we've gotten down early and had to climb back, but this is something we can't do against Chicago. If we have issues matching their energy, we shouldn't be here." And that was similar to something that Sandy
Myles,
Brondello
you
said
just
the other
rolled
day.
out. You just like were ready with that quote, and I love it. Sorry, continue.
No, it was just something very similar to what Sandy Brondello said going into the last game. And she was like, if these players aren't going to want it for this Atlanta series, which is basically a playoff series already, like there's nothing I could coach about them. And sure enough, these last couple of games, the Liberty have gotten off to good starts against Atlanta. Part of it comes off of some incredible efforts like Marine Johannes coming in with the Liberty down 9 or something like that, 13-4 early in the last game of the season, and then hitting 4 threes in the first quarter to propel the Liberty to a lead at the end of the first quarter. But that, I think that it's their depth. It's New York's depth that has been talked about all season, but not available because of a lot of the injuries that they've suffered throughout the season. So for the first time, they've had, I think, 3 games now this season where they had clean injury reports, and it's happening. They're getting healthy at the right time. It's Betnijah Laney is back and looking more and more comfortable each game, and she's now been slotted back into the starting lineup for the last 2 games, and just looks more comfortable. And what she brings them is just somebody who can go get a bucket, right? She's someone who can create her own shot. She can take an open shot in the corner, but she can also take you off the dribble. She can back you down. There's just so much versatility to what Banaj does. And I talked about it a little bit in the article that Danny Barlavi and I did previewing this series. There was a fantastic quote from
Shameless
Sammy
plug. It's
Whitcomb.
on Winsidr.com.
Yep,
Check
on
it out now.
winsidr.com. um, but just how important Benaja's been. But I really think that the most important component for the Liberty is to get consistency from the bench. They finished fourth in the W with 23.8 points off the bench, but in that Atlanta game that I talked about, where they only hit 4 threes as a team, in the first half of that game, they got only 9 points from their starters, but their bench kept them in it, outscoring Atlanta's bench 29-4 in the first half, and then finished with 50 points on the night. So if the Liberty can get that kind of production from the players, it doesn't have to be the same player every night. It could be Marine, it could be Han one night, it could be Sammy Whitcomb hitting 4 threes on another night. They have the depth. They've got Beck Allen now coming off the bench, so you've got the wing defender and Banaj with the starting five. Then you have Beck Allen, and if you need to go deeper than that, you've got Jocelyn Willoughby, or you've got Dee Richards, you've got Michaela Onyenwere. They have a lot of pieces, and I think that we've talked all season about how Chicago, of the elite teams, has the most depth because they were able to win a championship last year and then somehow build a stronger roster after that. Uh, but New York is a team that I think has a very underrated second unit, and for them to be able to turn to a lot of players that can get hot at any time if the starters are not playing well or showing that energy off the opening tip, that's what I think could help the Liberty steal a game or maybe even potentially steal the series.
I love the insight. I love the takes. I think it's going to be a fun series. One of the more, right, there's a few series. I think, well, let's just be blunt. The Phoenix Vegas series doesn't seem like it's going to be the most exciting of series. But I think this one really could be a highlight series that's going to have a lot of ridiculous clips, a lot of ridiculous takes, and just great. Like, who do you remember last playoffs?
Mm-hmm.
How much the excitement, the fun. Oh, but wait, real quick. Do you agree with me on my 5 minute take for on the Liberty, or is it just outlandish? Is it one of my crazy takes, or is maybe there a little bit something there?
I definitely agree with it, but I think you were probably a little bit kinder about it than I would have been. I think
Okay.
that the Liberty have given away a lot more games than they've worked back into in fourth quarters, and that has gotten better as the season's progressed. But there are a whole bunch of games this season where they were up going into those last five, a whole lot more than they were up going into those last five, and coughed up a lead than there were games that they were down going into the last five and were able to pull it out. Um, so yeah, while Chicago lets teams hang around, the Liberty do that as well, just without the same level of consistency that Chicago has shown in pulling out those clutch moment victories.
I like it, and I like that you didn't tell me I'm crazy. Key players for each team. I'm gonna say the possibly the two, like, we everyone knows about Candace Parker, right? Everyone knows about Kalia Copper. Everyone knows about Vandersloot. Like, the Chicago team is ridiculous in a plethora of ways, but I think Emma Miesemann is kind of the glue. When they need, she's not going to be making the Sports Center top 10 reel, right? But what she is going to do is consistency and fill in the gaps when Candace is struggling. Which, by the way, talk about a resurgence of a career since leaving LA. But she still does struggle at times. Courtney Vandersloot struggles at times also. Teams zone in on her. Allie Quigley, this has not been her finest of years, even though all hail the 3-point queen. Um, but Emma Miesemann, I feel like, has really slipped under the radar. And honestly, I'll just say it. She's looking to take a second finals MVP award. So for me in this series, and possibly for the whole playoffs, it's Emma Miesemann. That's my key player. And then for New York, it's another player we really haven't talked about, Natasha Howard. Um, there's a lot that I'm sure you could give insight into into what's been working for Howard this season, what hasn't been. I know the injuries, um, but I feel like the matchup style is going to require a lot. Natasha Howard is an elite defender at times. Yes, she struggled at times, but Natasha Howard can be somebody who truly can be the X factor because we off air we talked about Han and like, could she be an impact player for the whole series? I think we questioned that, but I think we both also kind of agreed that Han could be an impact player and a very key special player for a game. But I feel like they're going to need the same things that I talked about with Emma, they're going to need from Natasha Howard. Less of a burden on her, but when you look at some of the players on Chicago that people in New York are going to have to step up defensively, I think Natasha Howard has to be up there, if not the number one, if not the number two player on that list. Who are your key players? And feel free to tell me I'm wrong, crazy, or in between.
Well, first of all, I just wanted to say that you were spot on with Tosh. She is their glue. She is their defensive anchor, and whenever she's off the floor, you can see a really stark um, contrast from when she's on, because it's not her on ball defense that's most impressive, but it's her instincts off the ball. She's always in the right place. She's when they need to, because the Liberty are an undersized team. When they need to bring a double team, Tosh does that better than anyone else. She times it. She's got very quick hands, and she's just instinctual in a way that a lot of players aren't. They have some really good on ball defenders, but if they're getting beat at the point of attack, and when you're looking at a team that's got Courtney Vandersloot who can, you know, keep the ball on a string forever, or you've got Kalia Copper who is so good at playing downhill, there are going to be lots of moments where the Liberty will get beat on the perimeter. And Natasha Howard is absolutely an X factor in protecting the rim or in stepping up and just forcing the next action. She's also someone who can get out to shooters. And so she can make rotations. She always knows where she's supposed to be. And I think that sometimes gets lost when you see her isolated one on one in post defense, because she is undersized for playing the four or playing the five, whatever, positions don't matter. But it's her help defense
You and
that's really
Chris,
important.
positions don't matter. No, all right, continue.
But no, my keys for the game, for the series, for on the Chicago side, I'm going with Rebecca Gardner, because Rebecca Gardner is, first of all, just had an incredible season as a rookie. Her season debut was in the second game of the season against the Liberty, and it was immediate in the first quarter how quick her first step was. And she's a player that, when Sabrina does have off games, she responds well to pressure when there are people playing physical with her. What she doesn't always respond as well to is someone who's is down to say, I'm just going to stay on you all night. I'm going to stick to you. You could be on the far side of the floor. I'm not leaving you alone. I'm picking you up at 94 feet, and I'm just going to be in your ear the entire way up and down the court. And Rebecca Gardner has that kind of motor. So if the Sky are going to slow Sabrina down, Rebecca Gardner is going to be a big part of that. And I really hope that we see her on the all rookie team. I've even heard talk of her making maybe the second defensive team. And it's just, whatever it is, that's high praise for a 32-year-old, I believe, 32-year-old rookie. And then on New York side, I'm going to go back to Maureen Johannes, because she's a very streaky player. A lot of the conversations that I've had with Sandy Brondello this season and since Maureen came over, have just been about keeping her confident. And you kind of see that in her game log. In her last 10, she's had 5 games that are 10 or more points, 12 or more points, and she's also had a couple of games where she had 0 points. And you can tell pretty quickly when she gets out there if she's going to have a good game or a bad game, if she's feeling confident or if she's not. And it's huge when she's on, because she can hit you 4 or 5, last game of the season, 6 threes in a night. But if she doesn't have it, then the team just doesn't have that same kind of fluidity, that same kind of dynamic offensive, just they just there's just no let up when Marine is on her game. because she just opens up the floor for everybody. You don't know if she's going to shoot, you don't know if she's going to drive, you don't know if she's going to pass, and they're much better for it. So if they can get a couple of consistent performances out of her, that could go a long way towards putting pressure on Chicago, because they won't be able to keep their starters off the floor for too long.
Final predictions. I already said so. I'm a firm believer, and I can adjust my predictions at any point until the first game tips. Just because, hey, like things things change, like the betting line changes. But I did earlier on a podcast with Rachel say I have the Sky 2-0. What do you think? I fully believe that the Liberty can still win. I think it's a tall task to see them take the series, but give me a prediction here.
Well, we talked about this before we started airing, but Dano Mattia from Her Hoop Stats had a really interesting stat about how the Liberty play on weekends. They were just 4-7 on Saturday, Sunday games, but 0-7 on the road and -83 in those 7 losses. And in games that start earlier than 2 p.m., like Saturday's game is supposed to, game 2 is supposed to, the Liberty are 0-4 and -71 in those 4 games. So game 2 is really scary to me. I think for New York to come out and have a chance to bring this back to Brooklyn, game 1 on Wednesday night is going to be super, super important. My bias, obviously, being in the New York market, is I want there to be at least a game 3, because I think with the Liberty switching ownership after James Dolan basically threw them away and they were up in Westchester, they lost a lot of fans, they lost a lot of trust in the organization, and they've been trying to build back up, and they have been throughout last season, first with COVID restrictions that were limiting the capacity at Barclays Center, but even through this season we've seen substantial growth, and I think to take that next step they need to host a playoff game. So for that reason alone, I'm saying I want this to go 3, and I've got Chicago pulling it out just because they are the more experienced team. They are the defending champions, and there's a reason that they are the 2 seed and that the Liberty are the 7 seed. But again, the New York is a team that can beat somebody on any given night, and I do trust Sandy Brondello to make adjustments game to game. So I think this will be a series, and I just really hope that it is an exciting one, because it has the potential to be one of the most exciting series we could see, not just in this round, but throughout the playoffs if these teams come out offensively firing.
I agree. I mean, maybe a little bit of a. What were you? Wait, sorry. I was gonna call you out. Someone was tweeting at you today. What was the tweet that they had? They were coming at your bias, man.
That, well, yeah, they said I was biased in favor of Chicago, because in that article that Danny and I put together, I did say that there should probably be an asterisk on the Liberty win against the Sky because of the travel difficulties they'd had, and I was told that I was biased towards Chicago, which is the first time
Ooh,
that
you got
I've
called
heard
out.
that. No, it's the first time. I always worry. Maybe I overcorrect because I don't want to be too New York biased. But no, I hear myself talk and I'm like, yep, that guy only cares about the Liberty and no one else. So sure, I'll take the Chicago bias if that if that makes people feel better.
I love it. Well, we've all been there. Miles, you'll be hopping on for a stream or two, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, if you're there,
Talk any game, yeah.
how could all of our listeners not be there? Be there, or Miles will never forgive you. There, I said it.